What's going on? My name is Ruslan. Sad day in hip hop. Very unfortunate with the passing of one of the most prolific and amazing artists, I think, of this era, Juice Wrld. We're going to talk about that. We're going to do some Q&A with the Patreon community and all that stuff. So before we get into that, we're going to drop the intro one time. What's going on? My name is Ruslan, hip-hop artist, creative entrepreneur with King's Dream, ENT.com. This channel exists to encourage, empower, inspire you to live out God's dream for your life. That is the angle that we speak things through, is what is God's dream, what is God's hope, what is God's vision for all of us as individuals and as people, as the human race. And so in that, it's a very sad day today, man. I was on my way to play basketball at my old high school, ironically enough. So, you always kind of get that feeling of nostalgia as you go to your old high school. And as I'm pulling up, I get a text message from my man AJ TV, who sent me the news that Juice Wrld passed away. Now, I'm not going to sit here in front like I was some huge fan of Juice Wrld. I knew the big hit records, obviously Lucid Dreams. I've been familiar with him when he was on SoundCloud. Familiar with the controversy of the Sting sample and the Lucid Dreams and how Sting took 80% of that publishing. I think that a lot of people covered that, and very aware of how talented he was. One of the things a lot of people said about Juice Wrld specifically was how amazing of a freestyler he was. And so this wasn't someone that I would say like I'm a huge fan of, but this was definitely somebody that I kept up with in terms of paying attention to how like the publishing thing played out with the Sting sample, or the Sting interpolation rather, paying attention to just what he meant to the community. There's an interview with Adam 22 and No Jumper, doing an interview with Young Thug, and Young Thug speaking very highly of Juice Wrld, saying basically Juice Wrld is the best freestyler he's ever came across, which intrigued me. This is this past summer, made me check out a bunch of his freestyle videos over the summer, and I was like, wow, like this kid is really, really, really good. You know what I mean? Like really good, really talented beyond just like the cliche SoundCloud, emo rap, whatever box us old heads will put him in. This dude was special. He had something going, and I think he was just at the beginning of what he was getting into. And so what I wanted to talk about is the obvious elephant in the room. They say he was traveling to Chicago, got off the airplane, suffered a seizure, was bleeding out of his mouth, and then got rushed to the hospital and subsequently passed away. Now, so I don't want to presume and say with 100% certainty that we know what he passed away from, but what we do know is that he's had a long history of substance abuse issues that he's been very open and transparent about, and I would even say brave about. We do know that he did an album with Future, and there's this interview with Future, and not an interview with him talking about his interaction when he did the album with Future. And I wanted to pull up this article, and again, this is less talking about Juice Wrld. Rest in peace to Juice Wrld. Prayers up for his friends and family, his fans, everybody affected by it. But I wanted to speak on this as we're closing out a year, right, around the holidays, which makes a situation like this even worse around the holidays, as we're closing out a decade, as we're closing out now the third artist in 18 months under the age of 30, passing away from what everything that's pointing to looks like a substance abuse issue. Whether, being very open about blending lean and Percocets and all kinds of hard drugs. And I wanted to point to this Future article by Juice Wrld, and this is really heartbreaking. So let me pull this up real quick. So shout out to DJ Booth. They featured me multiple times on the site. They do great journalism, and they put this article up, and it says Future apologized to Juice Wrld for introducing him to lean, kind of. Now, Future is an artist out of Atlanta. He has the big song Mask Off. Future has been known for promoting illicit drug use in his music. Future has also came out and admitted to lying about lean use after he stopped using lean, right? And I did a video, me and John Keith actually did a video about the Future thing and the documentary that came out. And, I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of Future. I'm not a big fan of what he represents. I think he's kind of a crummy person for putting out this energy out there and then continuing to personify image of a drug addict even after he got clean and being afraid to tell people that he was off drugs. I'm not a big fan of Future. I'll tell you guys that right now. So I wanted to show this article and just kind of get you guys stuff. So it says influence, however incredible, often has consequences. Take Future, one of the most influential artists of this half decade. His sound and aesthetic have birthed countless artists, and his lyrical content too has its own slew of copycats. Earlier this year, 19-year-old Chicago artist Juice Wrld admitted that Future's music first inspired him to try lean. In a new interview with Vulture, Juice revealed that upon linking for Wrld on Drugs, which was a record him and Future did, which was all about drugs, which the pair recorded in 5 days, Future apologized for steering Juice Wrld in the wrong direction. That's the first thing I told him, Juice said, referring to Future putting Juice onto lean. He was just like, wow. He kind of apologized. Of course, Future's shock is understandable when making music and telling your story locked away in a studio. It is often easy to forget about the real-life listeners and impact your music can have. Thankfully, for however much Juice Wrld's music sounds like an unending cry for help, he has adopted to a more sober lifestyle. This part is heartbreaking. I've just kind of realized certain things about myself and my coming up, the way that substances played a part in my life, whether it was me doing them or other people, he said. It's something that I'm trying to separate myself from. It's something that I'm trying to separate myself from. And this is super sad, man. Here you have a young kid who is basically transparent about his own substance issues, transparent about the substance issues of the people in his community, and transparent about the fact that it was rap music and specifically Future who made him try lean, which is a horrible drug. I mean, lean is like liquid heroin, right? Like that's literally what it is. And onto pills and all these kind of things. And so again, we don't know exactly how he passed away. People could say he had epileptic seizures. I don't know of him having a history of that. We do know he had a history of drugs. And this is also not in a vacuum. This is now the third artist in 18 to 24 months, Lil Peep, Mac Miller, and now what it appears to be Juice Wrld having passed away from this this opioid hard drug issue that a lot of people are participating. And it's just super sad, man. It's very it's a very dark time that we've experienced with young people. A lot of and this is the hip hop is always going to be a microcosm of what's happening in society, meaning that if you see artists and influencers and celebrities dying of drug overdoses, there's people on a smaller scale that this is happening to. The opioid crisis, which is a big deal right now. We're seeing this stuff at scale, and it's very, very disheartening, and it's very sad. And it's happening at the end of a year and at the end of a decade, and you're seeing more and more people coming out and denouncing drugs. Guys like California rapper Mozzie has came out and kind of started going viral after he had some records out, but started going viral pouring his lean out and creating a whole movement of guys pouring out their lean and moving away from the lean. And that's becoming less and less glamorized. But the issue is, like, once you're addicted, man, it's a tough thing to kick. It's a tough drug to kick, whether that's mixing Xans and Percocets, whether that's lean, whether that's Molly. These are not like, this is not like smoking weed or you know, whatever. These are like serious drugs with opioids in them and some serious gnarly stuff, man. And so as this is ending, as this decade is ending, I can't help but to think and believe and hope that this will hopefully be hip hop turning over a new leaf. That the hip hop that we've seen now, hip hop going on, you know, 40 years, 50 years, is in a similar place that rock and roll was in the 80s, where it was all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? That was like a phrase. Like, you had a ton of guys in the 80s doing serious drugs, musicians overdosing, musicians dealing with substance abuse issues, musicians dealing with depression, musicians committing suicide, right? All these different things to where it all culminated. And I remember being a kid and Kurt Cobain taking his own life. And then it seemed like the 90s, when I grew up, it wasn't cool to use drugs anymore. It wasn't cool to be a drug. Maybe it's because I remember growing up in the DARE program. Maybe because I remember the war on drugs and you know, some of the positive implications of that. But I remember being in high school. I remember being in high school, being in middle school, and drug usage wasn't cool in popular culture the way it is now. It was in the 80s, then it shifted after a lot of iconic rock stars passed away. And then it settled down, and you know, people still smoked weed, but it wasn't like people were out here doing cocaine and heroin and popping pills. And then slowly it crept up. The thing in hip hop that was cool or was personified, unfortunately, was being the drug dealer, right? The Jay-Z's, the Nas taking on the moniker Escobar, right? It was the drug dealer was glorified, and then it shifted into the drug dealers became the drug users. And now most of these kids that are on lean usually are selling it to support their habit and doing other drugs. And so I'm hoping for hip hop, for pop culture, really, as this is changing, as we close out this decade, we go into 2020, we go into a new decade, that we can see a shift happen in the culture where this isn't something that's celebrated. This isn't something that's glorified, that people who are on drugs are like, bro, you need help. Like, we got to get you help. We got to get you clean. We got to get you sober. We got to get you off the heavy stuff. This is not okay. If you're sad, man, go see a therapist. Deal with your sadness. Don't just sit there and wallow in your depression. Don't sit there and wallow in your anxiety. Don't sit there and wallow in the darkness and think it's just going to get better on its own. It's not. You actually have to get aggressive and proactive with dealing with your mental health issues. And I'm hoping that's where things are going to turn. I'm hoping that this can be the last amazing, bright, talented young person that loses their life to something so senseless. Something so senseless. And there's been multiple reports of Lil Wayne almost losing his life because of the seizures triggered by the lean use. Rick Ross almost losing their life because of the seizures triggered by the lean use, triggered by traveling too much, not getting enough rest. These things are not in a vacuum. This is all connected. And again, there's no toxicology report. We don't know why exactly he died. But from everything that it looks like, this looked eerily similar to the music he was personifying. There's lyrics floating around of him asking, what's the 21 club? We're all going to die by the time we're 21. Excuse me, what's the 27 club? We're all going to die by the time we're 21. Juice WRLD's lyrics, right? So super, super sad day in hip hop, man. I'm going to bring in some guys from the Patreon community. We're going to talk we're going to talk about some of these things. Let me bring in my man Philip. He had his hand up first. I'm going to pin you, Philip, and we're going to go into the full screen mode.
Yo.
Yo.
So Yeah, I think it was interesting when you brought up the it not being cool to be on drugs in the '90s. And I remember as a kid in the '90s, that era myself. Over time, we found out a lot of some of our favorite artists were still on drugs, but they weren't promoting it the same back
Absolutely.
then.
Yep.
It was a difference in the culture of what was acceptable and what wasn't.
Yep.
Interestingly, I don't know if you saw Trevor Noah's recent interview with the Breakfast Club. And one of the things that went viral was his conversation about God and the Bible and things like that. But
Yep.
he also had a very interesting point that I haven't heard people talk about, where he talked about how we have rape culture that we're so comfortable with, and how in order to combat rape culture, he said, I think artists need to write consent songs. They need to write, like R&B artists need to write songs about the need for consent. And he jokingly said, like, you like something like it's fun if the homies can't have none, or something like that.
Yeah,
like basically, like, it should be like we should do that. And I think, kind of in light of what you're saying, I think what needs to be held accountable is the kind of media machines that are comfortably signing kids who they know are on drugs, like hard drugs, addicted, and they're marketing music that's coming out of really real depression, addiction, mental health issues, marketing that as entertainment value.
Yes.
And then when the kids die, they just sign another kid.
Yep.
These SoundCloud rappers, dudes, don't come from nowhere.
Yep.
These are people who are marketable. And so there's a machine that says that's cool. I think what's going to be helpful is if we begin to create a market that encourages people, like you're saying, to make songs that are saying things like, hey, guess what's not a viable option to deal with depression? Drugs. Drugs aren't a good option. That's not going to count anymore. We're not going to make songs that say things like, hey, this is a viable escape. Rather, we should be making songs that say things like, hey, we don't need to escape this way, or here's some healthy things that actually work, since we keep having a track record of people dying from this stuff. So it's very sad. Like, for me, you hear the legend words thrown around a lot lately, but every couple months you hear somebody legitimately very saddened by like the death of like Lil Peep. And when you like watch these guys' lives, man, this is not something to play with. And I think that's the thing I'm thinking about with this stuff. Like, Juice WRLD's material was very dark and sad.
Yes.
And when you have somebody who's got a very dark, like, content base, and coming from a really hard place, and yet the industry that he's in is comfortable marketing how he deals with his pain through substance abuse, I think we have a problem with that. We need something reversing that.
Amen. So, amen. No, that's great. Okay, let me bring in the homie Canvas. I think you totally nailed it. I'm gonna bring in Canvas. Give me 1 sec. Whoops. All right, you are on, buddy.
Yes, sir. So in my opinion, I don't have a lot of experience with drugs or alcohol in general, but I think at a behavioral level, I think this comes down to an accountability issue. And I'm reminded of a situation. It doesn't have to do with lean, but I mean, it's definitely an addiction. I'm thinking of someone like John Crist, who was recently, all over the place for his sexual habits while out on tour. I think this is an accountability issue. And, when you see someone like a John Crist, or you see someone like Juice WRLD, there's not a lot of people in these people's circles that are around to tell them no.
Yeah.
And I remember reading the John Crist reports, and basically the culture was that this was a known thing that was going on, but everybody was so afraid to tell him no and to deny him things that he wanted while he was out and about. And so I think as artists and people that are in the industry and in music, that are eventually going to be going out on tour and doing shows, some of us are married and have kids and have responsibilities. And I think we need to be putting hedges up around our lives, and people in circles with us that are going to be having our back accountability wise. Yeah. And when we're about to do something stupid, say, no, you're not going to go meet up with this girl in that hotel room. Like, no, you're not going to go to this place after that show. Like, we need people in our lives that are not afraid to tell us no.
Yep.
And care more about our spiritual well-being than us feeling like they're pleasing us.
That's good.
And I think that's really important in our church lives and our personal lives. I think people that have porn addiction should probably have something. There was a software when I was in college, a lot of guys in our dorm had on their computers where we could see the websites that everybody was going to.
Yep.
And there were guys in there that had issues with porn.
Yeah.
So I would say, at the end of the day, for me, I think there's a huge accountability factor there, where people that are in the limelight and people that are out of the limelight need to set themselves up with people that are going to look out for them, and be able to make those hard conversations happen with them. So that's just my 2 cents.
And I like Canvas. What I like about what you said is that you did not you didn't limit this just to drug use. You're speaking on,
because that's a symptom.
Yeah, that's a symptom, right? Drug use, depression, addiction, mental health are usually symptoms to other internal things that have us disheveled, and they can manifest in different ways. You know what I mean? And so I think that the tough part about the drug use is when it is glorified and when it is celebrated, and when you have guys like Lear Cohen going on the Breakfast Club and saying, well, I personally don't like drugs. I personally don't want any drugs around me. And then Charlemagne pushes back and says, well, why do you keep signing these guys? And he's like, I got to pay the kids' tuition. I got to pay the bills. You know what I mean? And it's like, bro, like,
what are you willing to compromise?
What are you willing to compromise? And so this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum, but it is and should be allow us to humbly search our own hearts and humbly say, man, what areas of my life are unchecked? What secret areas am I maybe pushing away accountability or afraid of accountability or don't want to address that I wrestle with? I think the thing that is unfortunate, but I guess in a way fortunate, is that at least Juice WRLD owned his truth. At least he put that out there. At least when this happens, it's like, I'm super saddened, but I'm not surprised. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sad,
Right.
but I'm not surprised.
Exactly.
When a thing like John B. Christ happens, and he's dealing with it, and prayers up for him, you don't know that he's out here wrestling with this stuff, because it's this clean guy image and everything is positive and I'm a Christian comedian, and then boom, something like that happens and you're like, whoa, you know what I mean? And I think even in his situation, like, he might have had that thing explode in his face, but maybe it would have gotten worse if God didn't expose it. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Maybe it would have turned into some weirdo Bill Cosby stuff. Who knows? You know what I mean? And so I think I appreciate that you address this not as a single isolated thing, but that this is really a reflection of the human heart. And when we are uneasy in our soul, what do we do to try to soothe and medicate our issues?
Yeah. Scripture's never outdated, man. I mean, like, at the end of the day, and you see, go back to when David's in with Bathsheba. You know what I mean? It's all the same heart issue, and it's all the same thing. What did he do when he wanted to sin? He sent Bathsheba's husband away so that he wouldn't be around. You know, if he was right there and able to interrupt the situation, you really think that would have happened? Probably less likely. So I think that just, to live the Christian life and to please God, we need to be surrounded by people who are going to challenge us on a spiritual level. So,
amen. All right, let me read some of you guys' comments, and then I'm gonna bring in my man Michael Claim, one of our new patrons. Here's a question: are there people in these artists' lives that can challenge them, push back on their destructive lyrics and lives before they start dying from it? I'm sure there are, but are they gonna actually keep them accountable? I don't know. Probably really tough to keep the guy accountable that writes your checks. You know what I'm saying? And that's just unfortunately how it is. You know what I mean? It's very tough to keep somebody accountable when they're at the top of an organization. You ever try to keep your boss accountable? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's very difficult to be like, hey man, you should really not speak down on the employees. It's not great for morale. Yeah, try that with your boss. You know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, a guy like a Juice WRLD becomes the head of his organization. He has a road manager. He has a regular manager. He has a DJ. He has an assistant. There's probably a team of I would assume no less than 3 or 4 that travel with him, probably as many as 8. And so all these people are around, and he's ultimately their boss. So you're going to tell the boss that he can't do whatever he wants to do? And that freestyle on Tim Westwood is so sad, man. I listened to it, and he did a flip of XXXTentacion's song, and the line was, suicide if you try to take away my drugs, homicide if you try to take away the plug. Like, that was the hook he kept going back to. And I was like, is that what X said? Because I didn't know X used drugs. And then I went and listened to X's version, and X's version didn't say take away my drugs. He said, it was about a girl. I was like, man, this is so sad. But I think that creates a culture of like and this is another thing, is like a lot of us want to be successful. A lot of us want to be rich. A lot of us want to be popular. Here's the thing, man. You get rich and successful and popular and get the clout before you have the character to handle it. And you are asking to self-destruct. Like, you're asking for, something bad to happen. You know what I mean? So let me read some more of these comments, and I'm gonna bring in my man Michael. Give me 1 sec. It's definitely scary to see the lean culture be glorified not only in hip-hop but in other genres as well. Well, in the industry pushing, supporting drug use and other bad behavior from these artists cause it's popping and good for business. It's stupid but true. I don't see. Here's my thing. And I've talked to labels, major label executives, and I'm gonna talk to more of them. I think that I don't think it's good for business. I actually think it's bad for business. I think somebody who does something that is self-destructive, whether it's they can't control their temper, they can't control their drug use, they can't control this, they can't. I think that is not good for business. I think it's bad for business, and I think these major labels are going to keep losing money because a lot of these kids don't die and then their catalog blows up. A lot of these kids get signed, they go a couple $1 million in debt, and they never take off and they never recoup, and no one ever knows about them. There's a lot of cases that we haven't heard about artists who aren't as popular as Juice WRLD or Lil Peep, who pass away. You know what I mean? And so I actually don't think it's good for business. I think it's bad for business. Lil Peep's manager was getting him drugs and pushing it. Yeah, that whole thing that came out about Lil Peep was super sad. I mean, just a community of enablement around him. It's also hard because I feel like the people surrounded by secular artists tend to not be good for you, in my opinion. Sometimes, I'll tell you guys an interesting story. I remember being at South by Southwest, and I met, if you guys ever seen Lil Wayne's documentary, it was one that he actually didn't authorize, but it came out, and it had his manager / DJ, Cortez Bryant, arguing with him, like heavy arguments, because he was so concerned for him using drugs. And there was a scene in that documentary, it was called The Carter, and it was a scene in that documentary where basically him and Lil Wayne get into it. Lil Wayne's cussing him out on stage, and Tez, who's the manager and the DJ, has to ride on a separate bus because him and Wayne are so at odds about Lil Wayne's drug use. I remember meeting Tez at South by Southwest and had an amazing conversation. And in the conversation, Cortez Bryant professed to me that he was a Christian and ended up telling me that if it wasn't for God placing him in Lil Wayne's life, that he would have been gone. You know what I'm saying? That he would have been gone. But he was unapologetic and stood up against somebody that was clearly dealing with some heavy mental illness and some addiction issues. And I applauded him for that. You know what I'm saying? And there hasn't been too much about that publicly, but I remember that being in the documentary. I remember he hasn't spoke about it in interviews, but I remember seeing that stuff, and I remember thinking how bad it was. But I was like, man, kudos to you. You know what I'm saying? I asked him, I was like, bro, that was really brave of you, So go look up that documentary, man, because maybe that is what helped save Lil Wayne, because Lil Wayne was on the same trajectory. And so Tez kept fighting him on it, and eventually, I guess Lil Wayne got cleaned, or at the very least, scaled it way down. Let's see. It's also kind of hard because it's not confirmed that he passed away from drugs. So right now we are just speculating, assuming until it's confirmed. You're right, and I said that, Dwayne Jones. I said that several times in this video. I don't know when you tuned in. I said several times that we are not sure. I'm speaking to the macro issue of, one, he definitely had a history with drugs. Two, we lost 2 other rappers in the past 24 months to drugs. 3, these are the same exact symptoms that we saw from Lil Wayne and Rick Ross, from using lean and mixing it with other drugs, and then having multiple seizures while traveling. And they both almost lost their life. So we don't know, and there is no toxicology report, but it is a pretty educated guess that that's what happened. You know what I'm saying? You got Yes Men and a lot of people doing just much crazy stuff. He was sipping too much. He was getting fat, drank, was killing his kidneys. That's probably true as well. I don't know. We don't know. We don't know exactly what it was. But nevertheless, super sad situation. Okay, I'm gonna bring in my man Michael, and then what we could do. Michael, you ready? Yo, you gotta unmute yourself.
Okay. So one thing I wanted to mention from an artist perspective is being under the influence of some substance. I think even through personal experience, you will find that it can actually increase your creativeness, creativity. So that's from an artist perspective, that's always of course every artist wants to have better content.
Yeah.
So.
Chasing that inspiration, right? Like chasing the inspiration that a psychoactive drug can bring, or a psychedelic drug can bring, and what that can do for somebody's creativity. That's a good point, man. And I think that is probably the more alluring part. Like it's deeper than just the addiction to the drug. It's also the addiction to what maybe the drug can do for you in certain situations. You know what I mean? So I think that's a good point. Does anybody else want to chime in before we move on? I think, okay, Michael. Yeah, all in all, man, super duper sad situation. I would encourage you guys that are watching, I'd encourage you guys who are affected by this, that you definitely should, if you're dealing with substance abuse issues, get help. If you're dealing with depression, get help, because this is serious. You know what I'm saying? This is serious. This is literally life and death. You know what I'm saying? This is literally lives are on the line. And if you're an artist, and I don't know how many artists keep up, but know that your words have influence. I mean, a lot of us from the Christian space, we understand how powerful words are from a very personal standpoint. We understand that words have impact. You know what I mean? So I'm gonna bring in my man Spaceship Coyote, one of the new patrons, super dope producer as well. What's up, bro? You got to unmute yourself.
So no, I was just going to piggyback off of what Michael was saying. Like, a lot of guys do feel like that drugs help their creative content, and I don't think it's the drugs. Like what I've always told, even like my best friend's mother used to do like jazz and soul music. And what she used to say is that drugs help people kill like the inhibitions, you know. And so it's like killing those inhibitions. Then you kind of you're able to explore more things and whatnot. And so I can remember being in college and recording with guys. And I didn't smoke, and I didn't really drink or anything like that. Guys were like, man, you ain't gonna never make no good music, like, you know what I mean? Because you don't do these things. And we were getting arguments about like Stevie Wonder and people like that, and they say, they would say, well, those people are under the influence. And we would go back and forth because we never knew, because we weren't in any of those studio sessions. They would contend that, well, no good music in history has been made without drugs, And so I really agree with what Michael says. A lot of times, people feel that they have to have those substances. I had a good friend of mine, man, when I did rap, he would what was it? Yeah, so he smoked weed. They didn't have any weed at the studio that we're at. And one of the guys was he was in a punk rock band, gave him some Klonopin. And like he was like sitting in the studio, like I don't know what was going on with God, man. He was just laid out. You know what I mean? And just because he felt that he couldn't create without having some type of substance, man. And so in that case, he just kind of took something. He didn't even know what what the side effects were. He just took it. You know what I mean? Right. And so like I'm weirded out. I grew up in church and things like that. So and I kind of ventured into like secular music and things like that. But it was like understanding at that moment, like, okay, this guy just took this medicine. Like this medicine that's prescribed for seizures that I found out later. And we don't know what's gonna happen. Like if he dies in this house, like what are we gonna do? Like what am I gonna tell my parents or the police or whoever shows up? You know what I mean? Oh well, he need to be able to feel the vibe. So
yeah, that's good.
I say, to add to that piece, it's not just the drugs. I think it's being able to remove those inhibitions, because you have people like Prince that was reported to never do drugs and was able to reach a certain level of creativity. It's just really creative and just probably more comfortable with himself.
Yeah. So, yeah. No, that's good. I think you totally nailed it. I would add that for me, I never got into drugs and alcohol because I remember being a kid and one of my mom's friends died from a drunk driving accident. And that steered me away from ever drinking, and definitely ever drinking and driving. So that was just something that like I knew that as I got older, like I just knew it wasn't worth it for me. You know what I'm saying? I feel you on the mentality to want to, you create under a substance. And here's the thing. I think there's a lot more safer, natural ways to do that. You know what I'm saying? To get past your inhibitions. I mean, I'll tell you what, I talk about this a lot. You guys are probably sick of hearing me talk about this. Working out, fitness, playing basketball does so much for my confidence and does so much just for my mental health and how I'm chemically more stable when I'm active and I'm moving around and I'm working out. That is one of the things that's taking my music to a whole nother level, taking my productivity to a whole nother level. I think, like I drink these little yerba mate natural energy caffeine drinks. These are amazing. I love the caffeine. And I've done, like I've drank before and recorded. Wasn't really for me. I don't think it made it any different. I've done, after I had knee surgery, instead of taking an opioid, which what my doctor prescribed, I took an edible. I talked about this when the Zoom call. I don't know if I talked about this publicly. I took a edible, 10 milligram THC CBD edible. I've tried to create under an edible, cannabis edible. Didn't do much for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just didn't do anything for me. Like, it was more of a negative impact. And so I think there's so many natural ways that we can deal with mental health, deal with anxiety, deal with depression, deal with a lack of creativity, a lack of inspiration. And to say that the greatest music has all been created under drugs and that kind, it's just false. There's so many people that have made amazing music, whether that's amazing gospel music, which went on to inspire blues and rock and roll, and the Beatles and Rolling Stone. All that stuff was pulled from black blues and black gospel music and bluegrass. That stuff was pulled from sober people. You know what I'm saying? Black gospel music was made by Christian people. To now in today's climate, I would venture off to say that a band like U2 that is massively big, was sober. You know what I'm saying? And Bono was sober. Bono was a Christian. A band like Coldplay has been, advocating for being sober. One of the biggest bands in the world. I would say a band like Coldplay, U2, Prince, another example. Prince died of a fentanyl overdose, but that was way later in his life, and he's always advocated for a clean lifestyle. I don't think Michael Jackson used drugs. You know what I'm saying? I don't think that was something that was a part of his thing. So I think to say that, like, oh man, you got to be stoned and faded to make great art, like, I just think that's complete BS. And I think that that's a lie that a lot of these kids are buying into that could cost them their life. You know what I mean? And that is super sad. So I'm gonna bring in the homie Sane into the chat, and then we're gonna start wrapping it up. Go offline, continue our Q&A offline. Where we at? Boom. What's up, bro?
Yeah, I think one thing that people need to understand is that there's never been any reason to think, I guess, that there's a direct correlation between drug use and productivity. Just because I know there was a guy you interviewed who has worked with, I think he said Biggie, who said Biggie would get in the studio and be like, I got to get my mind right. And we'll go, smoke and drink. And I don't think that that's getting your mind right, first of all, and two, that's not getting your mind right, because the talent, I think, is there whether you use drugs or not. Like you said, you tried a couple of things, and I've done the same thing. Tried to record with alcohol, tried to record with edible, and it didn't do anything better or worse. It kept me in my same creative space. I think people have that creativity with or without the drug. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that it's worth the risk to be like, well, let me see if I'm more creative and then try lean and then, pass out in the studio. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's not worth the risk. And I don't know where this correlation is coming from, where people think, oh, because he did a drug, he's creative. Well, no, he's been creative throughout his whole career. He hasn't been on, the drugs the entire time. I think it's more about the person rather than what you're on.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, man. I think you nailed it. I think it's just a sad day, man. I'll be honest, it's just a sad day. I don't it's okay to be sad if a celebrity passes away. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's okay to mourn. And I think this is someone that just had such a bright future ahead of them. And I'm super sad, man. And so those of you guys that are impacted by it, affected by it, I see this as a time in history in terms of hip hop music, hip hop culture, pop culture. I feel like this is going to turn the corner into a new decade, and I believe that people are going to be less reckless with how they celebrate drug use, they celebrate drug culture. And I feel like these guys like Adam 22 and just this like flippant thing about like, yeah, we do Molly, we do this, we like, I think that's gonna die down. And maybe people will keep doing that stuff behind the scenes, but I don't think we're gonna be seeing this stuff at the forefront and in people's face going to this next decade. And if you're dealing with substance abuse issues, if you're dealing with depression, mental health, anxiety, get help. Like, get help. And a lot of times you'd be surprised that getting help will probably just start with you going outside and getting some fresh air, getting some sun, getting some activity, getting out of your routine, getting out of your darkness, literally by just exploring and doing something different. So we're gonna wrap this up. Hey, if you guys want to hop into the Zoom call with us, it's in the description. All you got to do is sign up for the $7 Patreon. Hop in. We're gonna go offline. Probably talk about some stuff that is maybe a bit more personal. Thank you guys so much for watching this, man. I really appreciate everybody in the live stream. RIP, Juice WRLD. RIP to just Lil Peep and all the dudes that have passed on. Mac Miller. I'm hoping for a brighter tomorrow, and I'm hoping for just this endless, senseless death to end. Anyway, so those are my thoughts, man. Hopefully that encouraged you, inspired you in some way. And know that you're created in the image of God, and God loves you, and God cares for you. And his dream for you is better than your own dream for you. And his dream for you is one of diligence and faithfulness and being sober-minded and enjoying a relationship with him through his son, Jesus. So